This striking view of the New River Gorge gives the appearance of a rough and rugged land, untamed and barely touched by the modern world that rushes by in automobiles. Yet, this perspective is misleading. For half a century, the New River Gorge throbbed with energy and power, fueled by the lifeblood of the nation, New River smokeless coal. Following the completion of the C&O Railroad in 1873, the canyon pulsed with waves of drive and ambition as it fought to give birth to a new coal field. By the arrival of the new century, the New River coal field was as unpredictable and uncontrollable as any adolescent and just as promising. For decades, the gorge echoed with magic tales of riches won and fortunes lost. Most often than not, the name echoing along the canyon walls as these tales were told was that of the railroad town of Thurman. Like all great legends, the town of Thurman began as a dream. The man who prepared this successful mixture of dreams, determination, hard work, and shrewd judgment was Captain William Dabney Thurman. Unlike many of the investors who came seeking new fortunes in the New River Gorge following construction of the railroad, Captain Thurman was a local resident of modest means. However, what he lacked in finances, he more than made up for in knowledge and ability. Although honorary military titles were common during this period of history, Captain Thurman earned his the hard way, in combat for the Confederacy. So great was the respect of local residents that his military title would be used in discussions concerning him for the remainder of his life. During the Civil War, it was common knowledge that Northern troops dreaded the arduous task of conducting battle in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. It was a land where the enemy would stay hidden from view only a few feet from your eyes. Trails through the mountains were confusing, often disappearing at a cliffside without warning. Even worse, the local residents were clannish, unfriendly to strangers from either side, and fiercely loyal only to their type of mountain people. It was a threatening and dangerous landscape for young men from the fields of Ohio and Indiana. Captain Thurman took advantage of all these obstacles as he struck for the South, waging a type of guerrilla warfare that was relatively unheard of for major military engagements of this time. The captain and his men would strike without warning from the forest along the mountainside and then disappear along paths unrecognizable to the eyes of Northern pursuers. Throughout the confrontation, Thurman's Rangers, as they were called, struck fear in the hearts of Northern troops and admiration in the minds of his neighbors. However, admiration will not spin well, and following the Civil War, money was tight in the mountains. Captain Thurman, whose home at Minden was burned to the ground by Northern troops, returned to the area and began to rebuild. As rumors of the railroad construction reached the area, the demand for surveyors increased, and the captain began accepting survey work for additional income. Even the most affluent residents were strapped for cash money following the war. Like many surveyors, Thurman often provided his services for barter and was paid in goods or land. Such was the case when he did survey work for Peter Bowyer, a large property owner in the New River Gorge during the late 1860s. As payment for the surveying services, Thurman agreed to accept a few acres of property along the river. To those who viewed it from a distance, the property seemed an unlikely choice, for it was little more than a narrow ledge of land perched along a rough water area of the New River, useless for farming or ranching. Yet, as a surveyor, Captain Thurman knew something about the way railroads are built. With the primitive methods then available, railroad engineers preferred to follow the path of least resistance, a path that was often clearly outlined for them by a stream which had spent centuries carving it. As much as was possible, the main line of the C&O Railroad would follow the path of the New River through the New River Gorge. Thurman was convinced that branch lines would soon be built to meet the main line of the railway, and these branch lines would follow the nearest convenient waterway. Two creeks flowed into the New River directly across from the new Thurman property, Dunloop Creek and Arbuckle Creek. Each would soon share its name with a railroad branch line. Even before the completion of the C&O line, investors swarmed to the area of the New River Gorge. By the time the line was completed in 1873, mines stood open and ready to begin shipping the day the first train ran the line. The New River coal field began to jockey for position as one of the most powerful in the nation. Although this prosperity was sweeping the gorge, the first wave did little to change the fortune of Captain Thurman. His property was only a minor stop along the New River line, no more important or profitable than any other. For the first 2 decades, the captain and his family earned their living primarily by offering ferry service to travelers who wanted to get from the train station at Thurmond to other towns along the state turnpike. Ironically, Captain Thurman would not realize his true fortune until another player came into the game, a man whom Captain Thurman had nothing in common but location and ambition. That man was Thomas Gaylord Mchale. Captain Thurman, the former Confederate officer, was a man of strong religious convictions. His dream was to someday build a community on his property that would stand for respectability as well as prosperity. The prosperity would one day exceed his wildest expectations, but respectability for this town would elude him forever, largely due to the efforts of his neighbor across the New River, Thomas Mchale. Thomas Mchale was truly the opposite of the deeply religious conservative Captain Thurman. Thurman was a self-made local resident, while Mchale was the descendant of a wealthy and powerful family in Ohio. While Thurman was making his way as a soldier and surveyor, Mchale was graduating from Yale University. While Thurman had received his small lot of property in return for services, Mchale was given 12,500 acres as a wedding gift from a wealthy father-in-law. Mchale was a walking symbol of the type of men local residents saw swarming to the area now that riches were to be made. Thomas Mchale and William Thurman did not share the same view on many things, but the one view they had in common would throw them into the battle time and time again. They shared the same view of the mighty New River Gorge. Mchale's 12,500 acres of coal and timber-rich land set directly across the New River from Captain's Ledge of Dreams. Of all the differences between them, the one that would cause the most conflict was their different outlooks on life. While Thurman, as a devoutly religious man working toward a reward in the hereafter, Mchale was the ultimate businessman. As the coal boom era of the New River Gorge unfolded, the two men faced off from opposite sides of the New River with their opposing dreams of a fortune. A bridge that would soon span the mighty river, but nothing could ever span the gulf between the philosophies of these two men. Even among the ambitious and determined coal operators and railroad men of the New River Gorge, few could match Thomas Mchale in riches or personality. He was a man who refused to let anything stand between him and his ambitions. When he arrived in the New River Gorge, he found the property he had been given exceeded his expectations. It was rich in timber and underlain by 2 seams of coal. In fact, he was so impressed that he purchased additional acreage to increase his holdings to over 25,000 acres. There was only one thing wrong with the property he planned to develop. It was on the wrong side of the river. While the track of the main line of the C&O had been carved through the gorge on the north side of the New River, Mchale's property was located on the south side. Now, this had been a problem for landowners on the south side of the river since construction of the railway. Without a link to the main line, there was no way to transform the rich coal and timberland on that side of the river to the fortunes they dreamed of. What had been an unsurmountable problem to those with lesser resources proved to be only a minor inconvenience to Mchale. With financial backing from his wealthy family in Ohio, Mchale arranged the construction of the first Thurmond Bridge, linking the south side of the river to the mighty C&O line. He then entered into agreement with the C&O to open a mining operation 7 miles up Dunlop Creek at the first level land area beyond the river. This area he incorporated and named Glen in honor of his wife, Jean Dunn Mchale. This first colliery was opened on a lease-to-coal operator, Justice Collins, and the Collins Colliery soon became the biggest operating mine in the New River field. With the Thurmond Bridge as a link to the main line, the Dunlop Creek branch soon became a busy railway, turning coal and timber into cash. Like a tidal wave, development along the river near the Thurman property spread. Almost overnight, the dreams of Captain Thurman and Thomas Mchale became reality. With the construction of the Dunlop branch line and the Arbuckle branch line to the Minden mines shortly afterward, Captain Thurman Land became a rich and much more important stop along the C&O line. Unlike most communities along the New River, Thurman was not a coal camp, but a railroad town. All the coal pouring out of the gorge bound for the energy-hungry cities in the north ran directly through the new station on Thurman Land. Thousands of tons a day in an endless line of railroad cars rushed through the town and onward toward the cities. However, it was not a one-way proposition. Over 24 towns soon sprang up along the New River as men were brought into the mines and the area to mine the coal. These towns and their residents needed supplies, and the only way in or out was by railroad. From the cities to the coal camps came railroad cars filled with fresh fruit, furniture, clothing, mining equipment, and everything else necessary for life in the coal camps. From carbide for the miner's lamps, to the satin for the mine owner's wife's new dress, it all came through Thurman. Freight was not the only thing passing through Thurman. Over 75,000 passengers passed through the Thurman station annually. After stepping from the train, they did not have far to travel to Main Street, for the main line of the C&O Railroad was and remains Thurman's Main Street. The New River Gorge echoed with the sounds of a new prosperity, the sounds of railroad cars blasting from the mines, immigrants speaking foreign languages, searching for relatives living in towns they knew only by name, and over again, the name of the town that had become its heart, Thurman. However, a new conflict was coming to the forefront between Captain Thurman and Thomas Mchale as the wealthy banker announced his latest endeavor. Mchale was above all an astute businessman, but he was not a coal or railroad man. His family had earned their fortunes in real estate and banking. Coming as he did from a rich and powerful family, he knew that many of the travelers through Thurman would find little to entertain them in the rough and rugged coal fields of the New River Gorge. His first effort was to capture some of this money traveling through the coal fields was the Glen Opera House, which he constructed in the town named after his wife shortly before the turn of the century. Wealthy travelers made the trip up the Dunlop branch to find some of the culture they felt they had left behind in the cities. Although it was a successful endeavor, the Opera House was only the first step in Mchale's plan to capture a lion's share of the wealth of the new coal elite. In 1900, he began construction of what would be the most famous and infamous of his business endeavors in the coal field, the Glen Hotel, directly across the river from the Thurman lands. Mchale was convinced that the newly rich coal operators and wealthy travelers would welcome the luxury of all the comforts of a stay in one of the bigger cities, both in accommodations and entertainment. For this new enterprise, Mchale constructed a 3 1/2-story wooden building surrounded by a double-decker porch on 3 sides. The Glen would offer 100 rooms at an average rate of $2.50 per night, more than the coal miner's daily wage. The Dunn Glen offered visitors more than simply convenience and luxury. At this new hotel, Mchale was prepared to offer the full range of liquor and every gambling activity that could be found in the bigger cities. Captain Thurman reacted with fierce opposition to the plans for the Dunn Glen gambling casino so near his own property. It went directly against his own strict moral standards against liquor and gambling, and would also offer strong competition to his own newly constructed Hotel Thurman. He immediately made a move to curtail what he considered to be the immoral practices he was convinced would thrive at the Dunn Glen. During that era, it was legal for an incorporated town to pass ordinances and to enforce these ordinances in nearby unincorporated areas. As construction of the Dunn Glen neared completion, Captain Thurman officially incorporated the town of Thurman. At the first town meeting, the captain's son was elected mayor, and an ordinance was passed outlawing the sale of liquor. It was announced that the new town of Thurman would extend that ordinance against liquor to include the unincorporated area across the river where the new Dunn Glen Hotel was located. Thurman was confident that without liquor to fuel the appetites of sinners, the Dunn Glen would not long prosper. Thomas Mchale had been in business much longer than Captain Thurman, and he would not see this new project suffer from a legal technicality. 7 miles up Dunlop Creek, from the river stood the center of Mchale's empire, the already incorporated town of Glen. Thomas Mchale called the shots in Glen just as surely as the captain did in Thurman. He responded to the captain's move by extending the incorporated limits of Glen for 7 miles down Dunlop Creek to the banks of the new river, which included the site of the Dunn Glen Hotel. Glen, now the longest town in the county, had no statute against liquor, and the activities of the Dunn Glen Hotel could proceed as planned. The Dunn Glen Hotel grew to be everything Mchale had hoped and the captain had feared. For the wealthy gambler, the Dunn Glen offered a wide selection of everything from roulette to poker. The popular casino earned the nickname Little Monte Carlo, and the bar never closed from operating opening day to prohibition. There was no need to close, for the passenger trains ran 24 hours a day, and new customers were always arriving. Poker became so famous at the Dunn Glen that the casino earned a place in Ripley's Believe It or Not for hosting a poker game that ran continuously for 14 years. Legend maintains that it was not unusual to see amounts as high as $50,000 on the gambling table at one time, and as much as $5,000 might change hands in a single poker game. However, the Dunn Glen was much more than simply a bar and gambling casino. Visitors, respectable or otherwise, could fulfill all their needs at the Dunn Glen without even muddying their feet on the unpaved streets below it. The lower level of the hotel housed a grocery, dry goods store, drugstore, shoe shop, furniture store, bank, and even a mortuary. One could win a fortune, lose a fortune, and even be prepared for burial without ever leaving the luxurious walls of the Dunn Glen. And many did. The Dunn Glen became a social center for the more affluent New River Gorge residents and their guests. The hotel hosted society dances for the local coal barons, who danced to the famous bands shipped in by railroad and dined on delicacies such as fresh fish from Chesapeake Bay, caught 24 hours before and served on the finest crystal and china. Quickly, the sound of champagne glasses raised in toast to fortunes became a part of the echoes of the New River Gorge. The hotel hosted political rallies for the Republican Party, which was then the party of power. It was the place where the big deals of the coal fields were made, for it was the social center for the men with the money and power to make them. It was at the Dunn Glen that coal operator Paddy Rend sold his Minden mines to Edward Berwin for a then unbelievable $1 million. Rend was so delighted with the deal that he showed the check around the bar, bought drinks for everyone, and then stepped onto an outbound train and left the coal fields forever. However, the Dunn Glen was not the only establishment to take advantage of the free-flowing liquor laws on the south side of the river. Miners were not likely to be invited to join the celebrations at the Dunn Glen, and other less elaborate establishments soon sprang up to serve this less refined clientele. In bars with names like Stockley and Bear Wallow, the miners gathered to hold their own celebrations. It was a time when whiskey sold for a nickel a shot or $1 a quart, and the party never stopped. Gamblers, thieves, and prostitutes from the city were attracted to the area like parasites to an open wound. The Friday evening passenger trains were packed with these characters who came to compete for their part of the miner's paycheck and then leave again on the Sunday special. Once again, a new series of sound joined the echoes of the New River Gorge, the sounds of loud music and gunfire. Eventually, the entire area became to be known as Ballyhack or simply as South Side, but to travelers by railway, it was simply Thurman. Even though none of the activities that became infamous legends actually occurred inside the incorporated area of the railroad town. Even if Captain approved or disapproved of the activities in the South Side, he must have been pleased by the growth experienced by his town. By 1910, the town of Thurman was the biggest railroad center on the thriving C&O Railroad. That year alone, Thurman produced $4.8 million of freight revenue for the Chesapeake and Ohio line. The town earned another entry in Ripley's Believe It or Not for a store that did a business of over $6,000 a month without the use of any cash. The currency was scrip, and the purchases were deducted from the wages of miners and railroad men. The town was also the location of the Masonic Royal Arch Chapter number 24, which boasted a membership of over 1,000 men, although the population of the town itself was never over 600 men. Men from the towns along the New River traveled in by train to attend the Masonic meetings. So great was the demand that the railroad ran special trains just to provide transportation on meeting nights. It was an era that seemed destined to last forever, but the glory days of Thurman and the New River Gorge were numbered. By the late 1930s, mines in the gorge were closed as mining operations moved to more productive areas. Life was no longer tied directly to the railroad as automobiles and roadways became common. Thurman weathered the decline of the New River field better than most other communities in the gorge, which soon moved out to follow work in other mines. For Thurman was a railroad town, and steam trains still needed to stop for water and fuel. The Chesapeake and Ohio would hold out as long as possible against the wave of technology that favored diesel over steam. But by the late 1950s, the battle was lost, and diesel became the fuel of choice. Diesel engines can run longer and farther without stops. Gradually, the stops along the New River Gorge were closed and the stations deserted. Eventually, even the mighty railroad town of Thurman was crossed off the required list of C&O stops. For years, the Thurman station sat deserted, and the town buildings one by one fell victim to fire or neglect. Today, the station has been restored by the National Park Service as a visitor center, and the remaining buildings are visited by thousands each year. All that remains of the glory days of Thurman are the few remaining buildings and the legends which will live on forever. But at times, if one stands quietly on the Thurman Bridge at dusk, it is said that you can still hear the echoes of an era slowly fading into history.